a few years ago, I like to, for people that have worked for me for a year or more, and working in the studio, I like to, give them a nice Christmas present. And I went to Vintage King and talked to the salesman there that I'd always been dealing with. I said, I was thinking maybe a nice set of headphones. And, everybody uses Sennheiser. Is that the way to go? And he goes, you know what? Yeah, they're great. But the best headphones I've ever heard is a newer company called, now I'm pronouncing it correctly now, Odyssey. And so I bought, just pretty much without hearing them, I bought this set to give to my engineer, and have since bought 3 sets for different engineers that have worked for me over the years. And they're incredible. There's a whole different level of listening that happens with these headphones. Has anybody ever experienced Odyssey headphones? You got one. You back me up then, yeah? It's just like being in a room and listening to the best set of speakers you ever heard, but you can move around and not bother your neighbors. With that in mind, today we have the artist relations poobah of Odyssey. Chris Berens is here. Come up here, Chris. Come here. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the company. So,
well, first, thank you for having me.
Yeah, sure.
And thank you. I'll have your money at the end. One thing I learned, I used to use a very prevalent brand of headphones before I found Odyssey in my little home productions that I would do. And you aren't
allowed to say what they are?
I just won't.
Okay.
I try to stay above the name game for that.
Okay.
But really what I learned when I started at Odyssey and I started listening, and I was like, wow, what the heck is going on here? What it really comes down to is, in the headphone world, cone drivers suck. It's sort of like building a really nice sports car and then putting wheels from a Ford Taurus on it.
There are non-composers in the room. There are
Yeah.
a few non-musicians in the room.
Yeah.
So we should explain very quickly what a cone driver is.
Yes, and that's where we come to the slides.
Yes,
so,
okay.
Josh,
Oh,
if you
very
can put
good.
up that I have a little diagram here. Basically, these speakers, those speakers, guitar amps, bass amps, they mostly use cone drivers. It's a cone-shaped speaker, usually made out of paper, plastic, metal, whatever. And you can see the diagram there. There's a magnet involved, big heavy one that sits at the back, and there's a coil of wire called the voice coil, and that's what interacts with the magnetic field as they put voltage through it, and that's what makes the speaker move and vibrate, and that's what moves the air. For a guitar amp, it's really great because the inherent quality of a cone speaker is that it likes to break up, meaning it's distortion, yeah. It's being pushed forward and pulled back at the same time, and so it's rippling and kind of doing all these weird motions that are undesirable for high fidelity. They're prone to distortion. They're kind of slow. So when you have, someone hits a drum, in real life you go, pff, and you feel it, right? From a cone speaker, it sort of goes, oh, I guess I should push the air now. And sort of just goes out there. And it also makes a waveform that's sort of this weird ovaloid shape. So when the wave of air comes at you, it kind of hits you at weird times. Like it sort of flows into you in an ovaloid pattern instead of a flat wave, like what would really come out of an instrument or a voice. It's not so important in a room because mostly what you're hearing in a room anyway is stuff bouncing off walls. The sound, most of what you hear, especially in the back, is the sound bouncing off the walls way before you hear what actually comes out of the speaker. But with a headphone, it's right there. It's like direct inject. So those things become even more apparent when you have no environment, so to speak, to affect the way the sound hits you. So if we can go to the next slide. So what Odyssey uses is planar magnetic, which is a technology that's been around for 40, 50 years by now. Even longer, actually, 60. And what it is a flat diaphragm that's made out of a really thin, lightweight material with magnets on one side or both sides. So the magnet is not surrounding a metal coil that's pushing a piece of paper or metal or whatever to vibrate the air. You have a very flat, thin diaphragm. It's almost like a drum head, but even thinner. And we'll get to that in a minute. And it's got the voice coil part, the electrical circuit, etched directly on it. So we have 9 patents in the way we make headphones. So nobody makes them like we do, but we came up with a way to basically laser etch onto the diaphragm so we have a super accurate voice coil. And what that gets you, because the diaphragm is so light, it's so easy to move, stop and start, it's very accurate. Transients happen really fast. The sound just bursts out and comes at you like speakers in a room, but without the room part. So you can kind of take the room out of the equation. So we can go to the next slide. So this is where we talk about how thin the diaphragms are. So that big black circle there, that's basically 75 microns-ish, is about the thickness of a strand of human hair. So that's the big circle. Then we go down to the limit of human eyesight is the blue one. And that's basically, most people, probably, myself excluded because I can't see that well anymore, but when you get down to about 40 microns, you start to need a magnifying glass to be able to see it. And then the white one is a white blood cell. That's 25 microns. And then the red one inside there is a red blood cell. That's about 5 microns. And then we get to Odyssey diaphragms. So the light blue circle inside the dark red circle, that's our ultra-thin diaphragm, which is the thicker of the two thicknesses that we use. It's 1.8 microns thick. So when you're talking about how it can stop and start and vibrate very accurately, because it takes almost nothing, it's almost as light as the air that it's moving. And then we get into, in our higher end headphones, our nanoscale diaphragm, which is 0.5 microns thick. So it's 10 times thinner than a red blood cell. And a red blood cell is kind of disc-shaped. I'm talking about the thinner part of a red blood cell. So that's the little tiny white circle that I can barely see from here inside that light blue circle. So essentially, the thinner the diaphragm, the more accurately you can control what it does. So we can go to the next slide. The controlling part comes from the magnetic field. So we also patented this thing we call fluxor magnets, where in that top diagram there, that's a standard magnet. You have a north pole, a south pole, and the magnetic field goes around on both sides of it, right? And so typically what you'd have is the diaphragm on one side of that, and the magnetic field then affects how the diaphragm moves. Well, we figured out this fluxor thing, which is the right side there, where we kind of bend the magnetic flux. Question?
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
The top left one, is that a toroid sphere?
It would be, that's basically the pattern of magnetic flux, is the arrows going back and forth. So toroidal sphere would be accurate, yeah. So in the fluxor magnet, we figured out a way to sort of short circuit the magnetic flux. So we concentrate it on one side of the diaphragm, or one side of the magnets where the diaphragm would be, instead of wasting it, sending it out into space where it's not doing anything. So what that allows us to do is have, in the bottom picture there, you have several magnets with fluxors, and the diaphragm is the little dotted line in the middle, a dashed line in the middle of the green part. And so it's basically inside the strongest part of the magnetic field, and the outside, where there's no diaphragm, is the magnetic field is very weak. So this just basically gives us ultimate control over that super thin diaphragm and how it moves. It's basically like putting a vice around it and just telling it, okay, do this, now stop, do this, and it just reacts immediately, rather than this kind of floppy cone that we were talking about earlier. So we can hit the next slide. We also have another patent in how the sound waves come out of the diaphragm. When they go between the magnets, they bounce back and forth a little bit. And if the magnets are just flat, which is that left picture on top without the phasers, the waves sort of interact in a way that it's almost like if you throw multiple rocks into a still pool. you have all the waves of water kind of hit each other and bounce off each other and distort each other, right? And in sound, in audio, this relates to what we call phase, which is the timing of when the wave of sound hits your ear or your eardrum. So we introduced this phaser technology, which is basically kind of a rounded triangle, which allows those waves of sound to combine or recombine in a way that's very natural. So it helps that feeling of what you get in real life, again, back to that flat sound wave, the planar wave, because when the sound wave leaves the diaphragm, it's flat, and then it bounces between the magnets, and then it recombines, and if we can recombine it into more or less flat again, we're in good shape. So that's something that not many people do. In fact, they don't do it exactly like us because we have the patent. Aren't we lucky or smart? Our CTO has been doing this for about 50 years with planar magnetics, so he's developed a lot of things that make what we do unique. Is there one more in that tech section? Yeah. So the other thing is the voice coil, the electrical circuit that gets passed through the magnets, right? That's etched directly onto the diaphragm, as I said. And we figured out a way to sort of vary the width of the trace so that when you have less magnetic field, say between the magnets, the trace gets thicker, so it has more interactivity with the magnetic field that's there. And then when it's right underneath the magnet, where the magnetic field is very strong, we can make it a very thin line, basically like a thin wire versus thick wire. So a way to control the circuit so that the diaphragm moves like this. This is what you want in a speaker, right? Or it's this way, facing you, right? You want the speaker to all move at the same time and not do this weird kind of bendy thing like cone drivers do. So I think that was it, right, on the tech?
This one?
Yeah, that's just how we make them, which is cool. We make all our headphones in the USA, down here in Southern California, in Santa Ana. Yeah, our woodworker who does the rings is actually in Oxnard. And so he sends us the wood for the rings. Some of the rings that we do are wood, some are metal. But basically, we're trying to build everything we can here in the US. We make the headphones in our facility in Santa Ana, do all the QC there, ship from there. We sell directly, we sell to dealers worldwide. So we're trying to kind of cover the whole planet in a way that makes sense for everybody, so everybody gets a little bit of the piece of the pie. But essentially what we're doing is we're taking that sports car and we're putting really great wheels on it. So when you listen back to this thing that's been created either by yourself as a music creator or someone that took the time to do the production, you're hearing as close as possible to what it should sound like coming out of the system. So that's essentially where we're at. I have some pairs of headphones here, a couple demos, music players that we'll take back into the Enjoy the Ride hallway back there. So if you guys want to come back and listen, we'll have some listening setups, and I can answer any questions back there.
You don't have any out, you can just hold them up so people can see them?
Yeah, I thought about that, but I didn't actually open the case.
Well, I'll do it.
Cool. Flop it down and just, there's two buckles on the front. Uh-huh.
Are those kind of the weakest link as far as, when we're all cranking our speakers and blowing our speakers out?
Uh-huh.
If you're to crank it up on these headphones, is the diaphragm the weak piece that would blow out?
No, you will damage your ears before you damage the diaphragms from applying too much sound. Basically, and we've had customers come to us where they've gotten our headphones, and usually when you're listening to a dynamic pair of headphones, which is the cone driver kind, at some point the diaphragm starts to go into those breakup modes that I was talking about and distort, right? And you hear that, and that's when you kind of know, okay, this is about as loud as I should play it. Maybe I'll back it off a little bit so it sounds cleaner. And that's almost like a subliminal thing where you don't really have to think about it. But what happens when you get to a planar magnetic driver sometimes is that cue doesn't exist. So people don't realize that they just keep turning the volume up because they're like, oh wow, this sounds amazing. I'm gonna crank this and get the full experience, because you can see from this the diaphragms are pretty big, right? They're about 100 millimeters across, and they create some kind of thunderous bass when you have a good seal. And this is a closed back pair. These are the brother and sister of the LCD-X and XC. So there's an open back and a closed back here. But what can happen is people start turning it up and they don't realize it, and pretty soon their ears are ringing and they don't know why.
Do you have like a decibel programmable shut off?
No, these are passive, so there's no way. It's basically a speaker. So essentially where I was going with that was you'll damage your ears before you damage the headphones with too much volume. They're very strong. Actually, this material that we use for the diaphragms was developed for NASA for flexible circuits in space. So it had to be very strong tensile strength. Once it's stretched, it's stretched like a drum, really. You can flick the diaphragm and it'll make a tone. But then when we put it in the headphone, there's damping materials and stuff that keep it from ringing. But essentially, it's stretched tight and it's very strong. As long as you don't, poke something through it or smash the ear pads together in a really fast way, then it's really hard to damage them.
There we go. These are the kind of the high mid-range of your headphones, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You have some that are more expensive.
Yep.
And then, but they also make. I had a set that were in-ears, little tiny in-ears for travel, but I didn't realize they were open back. Mm-hmm. And I realized when I was on a plane or something, everybody could hear what I was listening to, so that didn't. It didn't work in that application.
Yeah.
But they make gamer headphones and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah, we make gaming headphones. We make some in-ears, like you said, open back and closed back.
Yeah.
And we make a little conference speaker as well.
Now, most people prefer the open back for critical listening, right?
Yeah, open back is typically thought of as the more accurate way to listen.
Yeah.
Because you're not constricting the movement of the diaphragm and reflecting stuff off the ear cup. But sometimes you need isolation, and this is the way to do it.
Well, so anybody have any questions? Yeah. Oh, wow.
Lots
okay.
of them. Wow.
A question, right, Tony?
Yes. What's the range of price?
Price range? We have basically for this group, yeah, for the friendly price. Our gaming headsets, which are very good, and I have one here, start at $300, and they go up. And these two that I'm holding are $11.99 and $12.99, and then we go up to $4,500 a pair. So, we're sort of like the Ferrari of headphones in a way. Going back to my analogy, they're built, appropriately for what their job is. So they're in the 600 to 700 gram range for these. We have some that are 420 grams. So those of you who could appreciate the context of 420. That's our flagship headphone, the LCD5. That's our lightest planar magnetic headphone.
Yeah.
So to people who say, "Oh, they're too heavy for me," well, that's okay. But sometimes you just have to get used to it. If you're used to wearing a lightweight pair of sneakers and you put on a pair of boots because you're going to go hiking or ride a bike or whatever, it takes a little time to get used to it. But your body adjusts.
I just wanted to ask, in the mid-'70s, there was a push towards electrostatic speakers.
Yeah.
And is this a similar situation? But I thought electrostatic speakers actually didn't even have a diaphragm.
Yeah, well, they have a diaphragm, but no magnets.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, we do make one electrostatic pair of headphones as well, and it's my personal favorite pair, but it takes a special amplifier to drive it and all that stuff, because you have to have bias voltage. But this is similar technology in the way the diaphragm is. It's a thin, stretched diaphragm. With planar magnetic, you have the plane of the diaphragm and the magnets. With electrostatic, you have the plane of the diaphragm, and it's electrostatically charged by that bias voltage I was talking about. So similar technologies, kind of different sound.
You had a question? Yes.
Are regular speakers all cone-shaped, right? Just your general variety
For
of
the most part,
stereo
yeah.
speakers?
Yeah, typically in the headphone world, you have until you get into the really high-end stuff, you have a certain number of manufacturers who usually make kind of off-the-shelf drivers, and people just pick the driver they're going to put in their headphones. So most of the headphones that you see that are under a few $100 are just off the shelf.
But what about, regular speakers, like stereo speakers that people would have? Those are still cone-shaped, right?
Most of them.
So,
there are some planar magnetic hi-fi speakers and pro audio speakers, as well as folded ribbons, AMT, they call them, air motion transducer.
I was wondering if that's something you guys will be expanding into at
Well,
some point.
our CTO that I talked about, actually, he started in the speaker world, and we were going to be started as a speaker company, and they made this big PA speaker basically that we have in our offices that's about, I think it's 8 feet tall, something like that. And it's got dynamic woofers, so because to move that much air into a space, you have to have a lot of power, and planars can't really do that, which is why they're really suited to headphones. But we have this thing, and you can hear it a mile away. They tested it at Edwards Air Force Base, and you can hear it a mile away. So yeah, and you can use this for speakers, but mostly you have to have some sort of hybrid to get the bass. And our CTO actually has a company called Dragonfire where he does make high-end audio speakers. Yeah. But we decided as Odyssey, speakers aren't really our thing because we're a headphone company mostly. Really, we're a technology company.
Well, you've definitely identified a new space in headphones that
Yeah.
nobody else is doing.
Yeah.
These are like more adaptable to human body.
Well, they're definitely more adaptable to listening. They're more pleasant to listen to. It feels. I don't know how else to describe it other than just feels natural.
You have to be a diaphragm.
Yeah.
Right on.
Thank you,
Well, come
Chris
listen.
Berens. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate your attention.